Okay. So we said that the Melamed Lahoel, Rabbi David Tzvi Hoffman, in this tshuva about whether you can have an organ in a shul, he says that he was shown a siddur from 1678 by a scholar that he consulted with, and in this siddur is a song before L'Chadodi, and the song, it says very clearly, was in the siddur. It's printed that the song was sung before L'Chadodi and accompanied by an organ and other instruments in the Meisel synagogue in Prague. And you can see, and he has a theory about why, from the song itself, why there was an inclination to do it, or why it was specifically written by this Rabbi Shlomo Zinger to be done with instruments on Friday night, because it talks about the Chatan and Kala, the bride and the groom of Shabbos. Now, usually in Kabbalah, now remember, all of Kabbalat Shabbat it's rabbinic. It came in the 1500s, and it's Kabbalistic, and ultimately it's a reference to the unity of God, the male and the female coming together to create a unity of God. Sometimes Shabbos is the bride and the Jewish people are the groom, or sometimes Jewish people are the bride and God is the groom. Shabbos is the time of the unity of the Jewish people with God, or God's unity, where we can truly see that even though we live in a world where God is hidden, that really everything is one. God is one. In Kabbalah, this is why Shabbos is a special time for sexual encounter, because that's also the unity that comes out of division. That's what Shabbos represents on a Kabbalistic level. So he has a theory that the reason it made sense to do it with music was because of the language. That if you guard both of them, Chatan and Kala, I'm assuming that means guarding and keeping the Shabbat, immediately the Redeemer will come and God will send redemption. Barina bo yavo, enjoy, the Redeemer will come. Zayom asa Hashem, simchas libo nagila v'nismacha bo. This is the day that God has made. From the joy of God's heart, we should rejoice and be happy. That's what he's quoting from this song that was printed in the siddur, and it says in the siddur it was sung with instruments, again in the Prague Synod. So he says, halachically, it makes sense that you would do this song with an organ and with music. Why? Because this song is about the Chatan and Kala, about the bride and the groom. And we know, if we look in Shulchan Aruch, remember, we looked in Shulchan Aruch, the Shulchan Aruch says that using an instrument on Shabbos is rabbinic. If you want to ask a non-Jew to play an instrument on Shabbos, you could. But for what? For a Shabbat Chatan, for celebrating the bride and the groom. If they got married on Friday and still celebrating the wedding on Shabbos, you could have, or if it's somehow a Sheva Brachos, maybe. That's the example, the sort of par excellence example, or the specific example, the particular example given in Shulchan Aruch for when you could use instruments on Shabbos is for a bride and a groom. So I think what he's saying is it makes sense that this song was created to be done with instruments, because they obviously saw the singing of this song with instruments as part of the heter, as part of the permission that the Shulchan Aruch gives for celebrating a bride and groom. Because every Friday night you're celebrating a bride and groom. What's that? That's Shabbos. That's the Chatan and Kala. That's the Jewish people and the Shabbos bride. Shabbos called the bride. Now the truth is that L'Chadodi is about that also. So why not? Why add another song? Gamkein Hatira L'Chavot Shabbos Malchusa v'Yisrael Ben Zuga. So he says here, Shabbos is the queen, Israel is the spouse, the bride, the groom. And that's considered Shabbos in Israel. The Jewish people are considered like the bride and groom. So it makes sense that you would have instruments on Friday nights. And it's part of the heter, part of the permission the Shulchan Aruch gives for a bride and a groom. It's a beautiful connection. Kopanim Nira Mikan should be make head, and basically that's he says, in any case, you do see that in the shul in Prague, in Meisel, Prague, that they used an organ on no, it was before Shabbos. It wasn't, you would argue probably that it was before Shabbos. Shabbos doesn't necessarily begin until after L'Chadodi with Mizmar Shira, with Baruch Hu. Now the Chassam Sofer says that they stopped doing it in Prague, or that they did not do it in Prague, But he says, you see from here a proof from this old published siddur that they used to do it in Prague in the old days, in the 1600s. By the 1800s, at least according to the Chassam Sofer said, they've stopped. But they did do it in the 60s. Avraham Emden, B'Sifrot Tzror HaChaim, by Avraham Emden in his book Tzror HaChaim, writes, Mashahevi Baal Hanoga Shesifro Lanum, Ikiligadisha Prague, that which they write that there was an organ in the synagogue in Prague. He says maybe that synagogue was built with an organ. Why? Because that synagogue, he's arguing, was from this book. That argues that synagogue maybe was built before it was a Christian issue. And he says that synagogue in Prague stood from the time of the Second Temple. Now, I don't know historically if that's even possible. I guess it could be. I mean, maybe Jews went to Italy through the Roman Empire. Maybe they ended up. No. I mean, is there a shul in Prague that's 2,000 years old? It's hard to believe. But the suggestion here, but even if that's not true, the 1600s is way before Reform. So the overlay of the reformness of the organ, or the organ being a way to be, a German and an upstanding, non-Jew, be like the non-Jews, that wasn't an issue in the 1600s. And so when the idea was created, it was permitted. Shuv Lohaya, because it wasn't Shabbos, they were doing it before Shabbos, and there was no reform movement. Shuv Lohaya, and it was a Christian thing, but in other words, if you say it's from the time of the Second Temple, it's not even a Christian thing. But let's say that it's not from the time of the Second Temple. Let's say it goes back to the 1600s. So is that, you don't need the reform movement for it to be an imitation of the non-Jew. It will be an imitation of the non-Jew. But the answer is, I think that it's all about kavanah. It's all about intent. Once there is a reform movement, and that's using an organ to be like the non-Jew, so then using an organ becomes chukot hagayim, becomes an imitation of the practices of the non-Jew. But before that, even though Christians use an organ, it doesn't make it forbidden for us to use an organ if that's not a cultural overlay. I think that's what he's trying to say. Now, obviously, if it's from the time of the Second Temple, it's not an issue at all. Avokasher nifla b'emes ein makima od ibnei shebeit nefilata kavar hanhigu leishir zeh argal b'batei avodatam l'shem avodatam dafka asura. It says, but once it becomes an imitation of them, it's forbidden. Ad kan l'shanu. That's the end of the quote from he's quoting from, which was Rabbi Engel. Emet says the truth is he says the time that the organ was put into the synagogue in Prague, or the synagogue was built with the organ, it says organs were not just a Christian thing. He says in early churches there were not organs. Now that would be an interesting question that we could probably Google in a minute, which is, when did churches start putting organs? But since we see that in the shul in Prague they did have one, give oraita ben klei hamikdash shenaval augav o shechashvut asher. So he says maybe they thought that the instrument used, remember I talked before about this instrument that was used in the temple that was similar to a argal, to a organ, maybe they held that it really was. Maybe, or the instrument mentioned that they did use in the temple was similar to the organ. And they thought in Prague, that since we're not learning it from the non-Jew, and there's a history of it in Judaism, and since afterwards, But afterwards, they got rid of this organ practice. So you see that they thought it was not a good idea. But then he says, under this, says you shouldn't bring a proof from one. You can't bring a halachic proof from one community, and to close your eyes to every other community in the world, in which we don't find organs. Jews don't play organs in their shuls. Playing an organ in a shul is an imitation. When did Jews start playing organs in shuls? When the Reform started doing it. So he says that's the real answer. The real answer is whether the fact that they did it in Prague in the 1600s, he says, proves nothing halakhically. It doesn't say anything about what we're doing today, because if you look around and see what people are doing today, the answer is the Reform are playing it, and those who want to imitate the Reform and be part of the Enlightenment, those are the ones who want to play the organ. So he says the idea that you've proven anything just because they did it in Prague in the old days doesn't prove anything. Because it's not inherently halachically a problem. It's halachically a problem because of chukot goyim, because the imitation of the non-Jews. So that's about intent. You can't deny it. I think that makes a lot of sense. I did find there's a scholarly article about this organ as precedent that somebody wrote. But I didn't have it. Let's see if that's anything. All right. That's interesting. It'd be interesting to find that sitter online. Find a copy of that sitter. It's published in Amsterdam. Song. It'd be interesting to see what the song is. Never heard of another.
I'm sort of losing you here. Maybe it's
just me. Yeah. Are you able to turn up your volume? Maybe
it's up as far as it can go.
Weird. I wonder if it's my computer. I did get a new computer. Is anybody else having trouble with my sound?
No, it's okay from here.
Okay. All right. I'll try to talk a little bit louder. I was just saying that I may try and see if I can find that copy of the sitter. So, okay. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you.
Good day. Thank you.